Spoken on the topics faith, family and freedom in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J. Loren Norris.
There was an old quote I heard from an employer one time. She was quoting a president from many years back, and the quote was this: "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right." Now, if you add that philosophy to the narrative that says, man, you're just going to end up in jail. You're not good enough to do that. What makes you think you can figure that out if nobody else can? You're not that smart. And all of a sudden you've got a narrative that pounds on your subconscious mind in a way that will either make you or break you when it comes to your success. That's what I want to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.
I'm J. Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and I've been in both sides of that arena of you can't do this. I remember being told, stop singing, nobody wants to hear that, when I would sing at the top of my lungs before I had any training at all in the backyard with songs that I made up, and they would go on forever. I had no idea what a song hook was, what a bridge was, what a chorus was, what a verse was. It was just a bunch of words in a melodious way, and I would belt them out for hours at a time. And I was told to stop doing that because it bugged the neighbors. But I also know how many times I've actually overheard people that I thought were my friends say to others, don't get him started. He'll wax philosophical about anything and you'll be here for hours. Of course, these are the same kind of people who ask, do you ever just have small talk? No, I don't have time for that. Sorry. I think the world has too many irons in the fire and axes to grind to spend time wasted on small talk. Have at it if that's what you want to do, but I think there are much bigger fish to fry, if you will, in this world than small talk. And if you get to know me and you don't appreciate deep thought, well, I love you, but I got other people to talk to. See, I've begun to shape my own philosophies in life through deep research and deep thinking and constantly thinking. That's why my little circle of friends that I kind of hide amongst are many of them college professors, many of them deans of psychology and theology and poli-sci. And we spend hours over a buffet lunch waxing philosophical about things that to me are just common sense, and to them they're like, I've never read that, I've never thought that anywhere, but given everything that I have read and thought, I can't argue with you. What you're saying just makes sense. That's kind of been the history of my life. However, not everyone appreciates that. In fact, there are those who would say, again, you're not qualified, you don't have XYZ degrees behind your name, you should not be talking about those things. Fascinating, because many of the quote-unquote philosophers of their day, they didn't have degrees either. I mean, here's one for you. The Wright brothers had no pilot's license. That would settle in for a minute. The Wright brothers had no pilot's license. Their invention of man-controlled flight never happened that way before. I'm sure people had jumped off of things. They'd tried winged flight. They'd tried a lot of different things. But the success to which the Wright brothers actually flew, departing the earth and returning safely, had not yet happened in the same way or to the same degree as it did for them. Why? because they refused to listen to the narrative others who said, you just need to stay in line. You just need to follow the status quo. That's not your bailiwick. You're not smart enough for that. You're not capable of that. I've mentioned many times the narrative where a parent or a father or a circle of friends, whether it's a gang or it's a school group, would say to somebody, you're just going to spend the rest of your life in jail. I can see it already. You're already on your way. And it becomes what we might call a self-fulfilling prophecy. The narrative becomes so common that people think to themselves, if I were to do anything different than that, it would be absolutely unusual. In fact, it might even be impossible for me to do better than that. Rocky Balboa, Sylvester Stallone. That story, if you go back and listen to the number of times that he was turned down, the studio said it's crap. It's not going to be worth making. People offered him everything from $500 to $500,000 as long as somebody else could star in it. But he was thoroughly convinced in his own mind, in his own personal narrative, that the movie Rocky could actually be something cataclysmically different than movies before that. And he was thoroughly convinced that because he'd written it, the character who was going to star in that movie should be him. And he fought, and he fought, and he fought, and he held out, and he held out, and he held out. And if you just look at his bank account today, you'll realize he was the one that was right, and all of the other people were wrong. He had to sell his dog at one point to make ends meet in order to keep up with the necessity in his heart and mind about pushing that movie forward. He had a different narrative. Now, one of my mentors is John Maxwell. And John Maxwell points out that in his life, his father, on a regular basis, would say to him, you can do this, John. Now, he would give him true, tough philosophies too, like you're going to pay now and play later, or play now and pay later, but either way, you're going to pay. Those philosophies drove John Maxwell's life to the discipline and diligence necessary to become Dr. John Maxwell, with 50-plus year track record of constantly pouring into people. But he said the most important thing in his life was that from an early age, he was not allowed to not believe in himself. He was empowered, he was encouraged, he was entrusted with things that were bigger than who he was, opportunities to stretch and to grow, and a belief in himself, because one of his dad's growing up buddies was Robert Schuller. You know, the Crystal Cathedral, the power of personal will, all of the ideas around what we now call self-development, personal prophecy, the ability to have your own personal power because of the power of positive thinking. That power of positive thinking was in John Maxwell's life from the time he was 10 or 12 years old. I can tell you, it wasn't in my life until I was in my 30s, almost 40s. And the difference in the gap of success between where I grew up and where I am now versus where John Maxwell grew up and where he is now, there's a significant difference. His level of success at the age I am now was significantly different. And I attribute a lot of that to the idea of the power of positive thinking. Again, my whole concept today is about the narrative, because the narrative leads everything. The narrative that you allow to play in your head, the narrative that you use in your home, the narrative that comes through social media, the narrative that parents instill in their children, whether it's one of hope and ambition, of possibilities and encouragement, or it's one of negativity and jealousy. It amazes me when I listen to some parents talk about how they won't allow, and they don't say it quite like that, but it's kind of in the recesses of their subpsychology, they won't allow their kids to be a greater success than them. Now, if you watch parents who are currently at a better state than what their parents were at the same place in life, most of them have an ambition that their kids will reach an even higher level. But there are those parents who see their children almost competitively. You see it in some of the issues like Britney Spears and her father. Whose money was it? Whitney Houston had a similar problem, according to the movie that was just recently released, that her parents believed that her success was their success. Parents who are jealous of the success of their children, they're going to have some challenges in that relationship, but children who submit themselves to a narrative that says, you'll never do better than me, you can't be better than me, you can't have more success than me, well, that presents a problem. I remember a very specific conversation. I had spent some time in the military in Lubbock, Texas. And while I was in Lubbock, I started working on a book of poetry. A lot of people loved my poetry, so I decided to actually make it a book. And I found this little place in early 1990s called Kinko's. It was near the college campus of Texas Tech. And in this particular store, if you didn't own a computer, you could come into the store and rent the computer. Type up your document, print your document right there. Remember, this is 30 years ago. This was a very uncommon thing. But I could actually create a book right there in Kinko's and have the little curly bindings on them or have them saddle stitch or whatever I wanted to do. I could walk in with an idea and walk out with a book just by paying for the printing and the paper and the rental of the computer. Astonishing ideas. And so when I got out of the Air Force a few years later and I was in a small college town in East Texas, I thought, what this town needs is one of those. That place was incredible. This little town is even bigger than that. It would be awesome. And I remember telling my dad at that time, they should have a Kinko's here, to which he replied, son, if the people who run multi-million-dollar companies like Kinko's thought that that business would be successful where you are, there would already be one. I said, well, maybe they just haven't discovered it yet. If we just put enough investors together, we could build one of our own, even if Kinko's doesn't decide to come. He said, that's the dumbest thing ever. Let the people who are qualified to think like that. You do your job. 6 months later, Kinko's opened 3 blocks from the little Postal Plus store that I was running. In the first year, they did over $1 million in net sales. Let the people who get paid to do the thinking on that thing do the thinking, and, well, you stick to your job. Now, let me ask you, how many of you, as leaders, have made a similar statement to that to the people on your team? You've allowed the narrative that drove you to become who you are to suppress the people around you, rather than taking a chance that, I mean, can you imagine being a team lead and having some whippersnapper named Elon show up on your team? Or Steve Jobs, or Bill Gates, or Mark Zuckerberg. Can you imagine having to manage the 20-something that was any one of those 4 guys before everybody in the world knew who they were, before their genius was discovered? Can you imagine having to be the supervisor who oversaw their creativity and their innovation? For how long could you have tolerated that against your own ego as a leader? See, leaders lead the narrative because the narrative leads everything. Cultures, society, nations, and kings are founded within the narrative. They're created by the narrative. They're also destroyed by the narrative. Think how many times you've heard a news story about XYZ new leader is being put down because they disagreed with so-and-so. Their political adversaries do everything they can to destroy their credibility and their character, to malign them, to demean them. Many of them step down from office or running from office, not because they've done anything wrong, illegal, or even immoral, but because of the pressure of the narrative of their opponents. I'm telling you, in this day where rhetoric is proving that the pen is mightier than the sword, the pen doesn't look like a pen anymore. The pen looks more like a keyboard. And there are many keyboard warriors out there today who are leading a narrative of absolute lies and corruption, and they know it. They're spouting untruths that they know are untruths, and they're willing to pay the price for that if they ever get caught or if they're ever held accountable, because their only agenda is to destroy somebody else's philosophy. They lead by narrative alone. Oh, they're not really going to make any sacrifices. They're not really going to change anything on their own. They're not really going to put themselves out there. But they will dox you in a heartbeat. They will ridicule you in a heartbeat. They will cancel you in a moment's notice if you defy their ideas. Now, let me just tell you something in case you're curious. There is nothing new under the sun. This is not a new occurrence. In fact, I'm going to share with you from a little book that I picked up over the weekend. It's called The History of Philosophy. This book was published in 1914. 1914. Just noodle on that for a minute and think to yourself, what in the world was going on in 1914? Well, it was around the time of the First World War. It's around the time of socialism and Marxism rising up in the world for people to kind of get a good look at it and being considered a possible solution for all of the world's ills. Simultaneously, this was written. Kant's heritage from his predecessors. I'm just going to read a couple of lines here that the previous owner of this book, I love buying used books, the previous owner of this book underlined these words, and I'm going to share them with you because I found it fascinating in this concept of how narrative impacts everything from culture and society to history and governments. It says, quote, this is page 413 of The History of Philosophy, published 1914. Quote, what particularly provoked such anti-rationalistic outbursts as these in the modern era was the mechanistic and deterministic worldview to which scientific rationalistic thinking seemed inevitably to lead and which degraded the individual to the role of a marionette. Rationalistic, deterministic worldview which led the individual to be viewed only as a marionette. To many minds, the unaided natural intelligence appeared to end either in hopeless or cheerless skepticism, or in a tragic fatalism that mocked humanity's deepest yearnings and rendered fictitious its most precious values. Okay, I know that's deep thinking stuff. Now, who wants to get into that stuff so early in the morning? You know, but nobody wants to dive into that yet. Yes, take a moment and let your mind settle with the idea that it's been more than 115 years that people have been pounding on the mind that says, I have a new idea. No, you don't have any new ideas. Settle down. Settle down. Settle down and listen to what we're telling you to do. Be the kind of person we told you to be. Just stop that thinking stuff. We'll have no free thinking. That will not be tolerated. For more than 115 years, it's been pounded in the philosophies of ideas. You will either be a hopeless, cheerless skeptic or a tragic fatalism, mocked humanity's deepest yearnings and rendered fictitious its most precious values. That place in life where you believe you've got a new idea, a new innovation, a new invention, a new opportunity, a new relationship, and that you believe, how silly of you, that you can change the world. The minute those words rise up in your psyche and begin to seep out of your mouth or out of your fingers through a keyboard or out of your hands through a pen and into a book and onto paper, and oh my gosh, they might influence the way other people think. The naysayers will gather around in a moment's notice and put you back into the mechanism that says you just need to follow the process. If the great minds who control the world have not figured that out yet, then it can't be right. There's no chance that you as an individual could have this thought that would be revolutionary. I mean, what kind of knucklehead wants to take a rocket to the moon and back? Why would you do that? Just blast them up there and leave them. Elon is the first to successfully leave the orbit of the Earth and come back to the Earth in the same rocket and land it in such a manner that it's reusable. Who'd have thunk it? Also the first to create a successful and viable electric car. Not just a car, an industry. In fact, dealerships all over the country, around the world, that are capable of competing with the three major corporations who make automobiles. Don't let the narrative of those who are jealous of your success stop you lead the narrative. Take the chance, step out there on the edge, share your new ideas, share those ideas. In fact, John Maxwell says when you do that deep thinking, sometimes you got to take that ugly dog for a walk. I think of Lilo and Stitch when they first adopted Stitch. And she said, "Is that even a dog?" And she said, "Well, we need something durable that won't get run over by a car. We need a lobster." She said, "No, Lilo, we have a doggy door, not a lobster door." Sometimes your ideas are somewhere between a lobster and an alien, and nobody knows what to do with them. And at that moment, it's time for you to take your thought and get back to your journal and spend some more time writing. Spend some more time thinking, fleshing it out. Pounding those ideas like a tenderized chicken breast until it's something of substance that everyone can appreciate. Sometimes your idea is ahead of its time. And you'll cast your idea out there and people will look at you like the Studebaker. Why do the headlights turn when you turn the steering wheel? That is so bizarre. No other car in the world does that. They do now. They actually have digital processes now when your headlights can adjust to the turning of the corner. In the 70s, they actually put lights in the front bumper on the side fenders so that you could see the sides of the road, not just where you were thinking about going, but where you're about to go when you actually turn the wheel. What a novel concept. Yeah, it came out in the 40s and 50s, and everybody mocked it then. I'd be willing to bet in your mind today there's an idea that you haven't shared with anybody because the narrative that's been pounded into you says, if the brilliant minds in this world, those who already lead everything, have not thought of that, well, then it can't be right. And I'm going to tell you right now, stop listening to them. They're morons. There are a whole lot of people who've been elected to, appointed to, assigned to, allowed to lead us, who should be responsible for cat food boxes and nothing more. There are also a whole lot of brilliant people who've been overlooked, underestimated, and silenced, who should be leading the free world as we know it. You may be one of them. And I want to challenge you as a leader to lead the narrative. Stop assuming that the story that you just heard is the only story there is, or that it's accurate. For over 120 years, philosophers have argued. For thousands of years, philosophers have argued. Is the world flat or is it round? Let's at least have the conversation. Show me your data. Show me your facts. Explain to me why you think the way you do. I'm willing to listen and consider. I might consider you're a nut, but I will listen and consider. And I think that's the responsibility of a leader. To lead the narrative by sharing new ideas and being willing to hear them. And that's my challenge for you today. Take the time to participate in narratives that are not common. Take the time to participate in narratives that don't sound like everything you've already heard and already said. Take the time to be a part of a narrative that could reshape culture, reshape what we call society, reshape what we call nationalized or globalized governments, reshape the involvement of humanity in this symbiotic relationship we have with this earth that we live on. There are narratives out there that have been silenced and quieted out of fear. There are narratives out there that dominate the landscape from every direction. It's time they coexist. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.
Loren is a master teacher on storytelling, and I learned so much. I'm really going to have to sit down and go back through everything, and I think I might have to have some more coffees with Loren, but it was totally worth my time, and I really highly recommend it if you're looking to grow your ministry, grow your business, grow your career. Loren will serve you well.
Thank you.